ago, I wrote a book called A New Spirituality Beyond Religion. And in Chapter 7 of the book, I wrote about unseen friends and unseen realms. Since that time, I have learned far more about unseen friends and unseen realms. And I've learned primarily from two of my guests who are here today. My friend Shawn Randall, who is an internationally known lecturer, teacher, and channels Torah, mainly Torah, who together they give channeling classes. So those are my two teachers, one a seen friend, another an unseen friend. So Shawn, welcome to my show.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And to get us started, before you channel Torah, tell me how you began channeling yourself, and then how did that evolve into giving classes?
Thank you. First, I'd like to thank you very much for having me on the show and for this show, because I think this show is a beautiful service that you're providing to people to help expose them in a very natural, organic way to the unseen dimensions. I began channeling in the context of a class, and then my channeling evolved out of work with a psychologist and a group of psychologists as a part of a PhD dissertation. Out of that evolved the understanding that learning to channel was indeed a process of self-integration and personality integration. So I call that the channeling process, a process of learning to channel as a process of personal growth. And when that became very apparent, when that started taking on very specific forms, such as looking at the inner child, parts of ourselves, etc., I was very moved to begin to teach this. And right simultaneous to that, several people came to me and said, would you teach a class, would you teach a class, would you teach a class? So I thought that was a very good signal that that was the right time. And I started very small with one class in 1984, end of 1984. And it's evolved and mushroomed and gone on from there. And the channeling process has also evolved the more we've learned about it as it's gone along.
Did you connect with Torah right off? Were you channeling Torah for those in your channeling class, or how did you connect with Torah?
Well, Torah is my main unseen friend that I channel. And Torah was not the first that came. There were a couple of others that I felt were preparatory. In hindsight, I could look back and say, oh, okay, that was sort of a preparation process. And Torah came along about a month and a half after I'd channeled. And one thing I'd like to say about the name Torah, if I could, because a lot of people get thrown by that, because it is the word for sacred books of the Hebrew Bibles, sacred texts. Torah uses the name Torah, the being that I channel, uses that name in a generic reference, meaning teachings of love and light. So as if he's saying, being of teachings of love and light. So that's why the use of the name Torah, and that came when he appeared on the scene.
Oh, I'm glad you clarified that, because that could be confusing to people.
Yes.
So thanks for that.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate that wonderful personal discussion. And now, if you would do your process to bring in Torah, and while Shawn does that, we'll roll the credits. The name of the show is Living Wisdom, and I'm Patty. Yes, this is Patty Paul, and Shawn Randall is in her process bringing Torah in. And I can tell that Torah's energy will soon be with us.
Well, we would say greetings, and greetings indeed then to you, dear Patty. What a pleasure it is to be here with you in this way.
Yes, and greetings to you, Torah, and thank you so much for being a guest on my show. It's a thrill for me. Over the many years, you have helped me so much get in touch with my unseen friends. And it's been such a healing process for me, such an opportunity for me to work on my own growth and change. So as we begin, I'd like you to talk about the unseen friends, who they are, why they're available to us.
All right, with pleasure, absolutely. The unseen friends. We would suggest that first we'd like to begin with what they are not. They are not dead people in that way from the other side, so to speak, nor are they some part of a very specific hierarchy that is to be dissected as such, but rather the unseen friends that come to, let us call it, the new channels of this new time, are beings who come in the function of teachers and healers and friends. And that is a very broad statement, truly so. However, it is very specific in terms of how these unseen friends come. Would you like us to address that, the how and why they come?
Please
Not only
do.
the who, but the how and why.
Yes.
So who? They are teachers, they are healers, they are friends. But why they are coming in that way is to be answered in the following way. There is a new evolution of spirituality on the planet. There is indeed new spirituality. Now, spirituality and humanity have always been connected. There have always been many, many levels of dimensions available to human beings throughout history. There have been shamans, there have been prophets, there have been seers in that way, there have been oracles. And throughout history there is quite an extensive litany of those that have gone before in the multidimensional way. However, it has always been reserved for the elite few. Now, however, sweeping humanity is an urge to connect to the divine themselves rather than with an intermediary such as a priest, etc. So in that way, there are people wanting to sense the presence of the divine more than ever before themselves. And with channeling, there is that sense of the presence of the divine. There are consciousnesses that are not physical, that are of the non-physical realm, such as ourselves, who respond to that yearning, who respond to that calling that humanity has to experience more of the realm of the gods and goddesses, if you will, more of the ineffable, more of the quintessential spirituality. And so this evolution of spirituality is drawing more and more beings to the planet. Now, with that, we would also add that it is becoming an evolution in consciousness itself, as people are learning to use the physical brain more and in new and more ways, with more use of imagination than ever before in that way. Truly, the ability to connect to other dimensions is becoming a very matter-of-fact, everyday affair for people. So we of the unseen realms come in response to this yearning, in response to this desire of humanity to grow. And how we do it is that we come in on the vibration of affinity. We come in with our love, seeking those who would love. In that way, we come in with our joy, seeking those who would have the joy of spiritual contact. So we'll turn it back to you, dear one.
Oh, I'm thrilled hearing this information. I'm always learning so much from you, Torah. I'm thinking of the viewer at home who perhaps has not been exposed to any of this information before. But their interest might be piqued, although they might not be able to attend channeling classes or get that kind of formal introduction and instruction in connecting with their unseen friends. So please share some of your insights and suggestions on how the average person, let's say, who has the inclination could connect with their unseen friends?
All right, that's a very good question. And first it begins with self. It begins with knowing the self. It begins with also, to quote your Shakespeare, to thine own self be true. Knowing the self and being true to yourself also means honoring yourself by setting boundaries. And that means that as you become more self-aware, you make your life about conscious choice and conscious creation. You want to have a certain kind of life, you make certain choices to give yourself that life. You want to have a certain profession, you go to school to learn that profession, etc. So life and humanity is filled with conscious choices that are very important in creating or crafting a life in that way. Well, so it is with accessing other dimensions and other realms. One looks at one's true desires and then is very conscious of, let us call it, boundaries. Being conscious of what is me and what isn't me. And so we recommend that people make connection with unseen friends telepathically, but first by drawing a very strong boundary around themselves to know what is me and what isn't me. Now I know what is me. These are my thoughts, these are my feelings, but I, speaking as a person going through this, I now choose to go into a meditation and open a door in my mind for communication. Just open a little door. I, the person choosing to access unseen friends, I am opening that door. I am making that choice. And I will close that door when I'm ready. So I open the door. I ask first for the higher self. Now, what that means is that each person has their own higher consciousness that is a part of their grander and greater consciousness. And that inner wisdom that belongs to them can also function like an unseen friend. That grander wisdom that belongs to each individual is available to each individual. And yet it still requires a boundary and a portal and a meditation. So we recommend that people begin by knowing themselves and why they would like to communicate with other dimensions of thought, and set that boundary. The boundary also is circumscribed by the time period. I choose the time. I choose to go into meditation. I choose to go into meditation for 20 minutes or half an hour. That is the time. I'm starting at 6:30. That is my boundary. That is a circumstance I set up. And then I go into meditation. I ask that my higher consciousness, my own source of infinite wisdom within, come to me first. Then we say, okay, you can go a little further and ask your higher consciousness, your higher self, to bring a guide or a counselor that may be another unseen friend. So we believe that this step-by-step approach maintains for the individual a sense of their own identity, a sense of their own free will and free choice, and sets the, quote, boundaries for the interaction. All right?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, that sounds like the empowered way, where the individual, the human being, is empowered and maintains their own integrity, their own sense of self.
Furthermore, we would say it's very, very important that people go to other dimensional consciousness, whether it's a higher consciousness or another, with growth-oriented questions. Mm-hmm. Not questions such as, what are the winning lottery numbers, and who's going to win the 6th race at Santa Anita, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. But really something that speaks to their own soul, mm-hmm, and to their own spiritual evolution. These are the important questions, and it is to these questions that unseen friends will gravitate and will magnetize themselves.
Mm-hmm. So motivation and intention for my highest good with harm to none, to kind of set the tone in that way?
Is key, yes.
And knowing it would be part of my spiritual path, or choosing that it would be my part of my spiritual path in that way.
Absolutely. That it is your spiritual path to expand awareness, for example. I want to expand awareness and become aware that I, as a human being, am more than that. How do I do that? Well, I want to access my higher consciousness. And in that way, expanding and having that intention, asking oneself the questions such as, what can I do to be more loving to people? How do I block myself from lifting my judgment of others? How can I lift my judgment of others? How can I get rid of this self-pity that I am embroiled in today? How can I become a better person in that way and develop my soul's connection to my human self and personality?
Yes, that feels so right. Getting back to something you said when you first began speaking today, you mentioned the new channels or the new information and the evolution of consciousness. Of course, we're in this wonderful information age that's a big part of the whole picture here. And I'd like you to talk a bit about, shall we say, the old age channels and the information that was channeled in centuries past.
Absolutely. Well, channeling of yore, so to speak, channeling in history has often been geared toward prophecy and proof. Prophecy and proof. In other words, beings that come to prove they are there, to prove they are real. And for example, in the 1800s, you had a lot of spirit activity from the other side trying to show people that spirit is real, trying to move things, create voices, even do full body spirit manifestation through an apparition, for example, to prove, I'm here, there is more than meets the eye. So there was a great deal of emphasis on it there. And before that, of course, the prophets of yore, even some, and there's many references to prophecy certainly in the Bible, and the history of the Oracle of Delphi and on, would bring prophecy in that way. And so proof and prophecy have been very much the emphasis in the past. However, with the advent of the evolution of consciousness brought in by Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung, something began to change in the early 20th century. And what began to change was humanity's view of itself. And as you began to see yourself differently, then it became possible for you to include how others see you as well. That bears a bit of pondering, but we'll leave it at that for now. As Carl Jung, in that way, quote, discovered, uncovered, expanded upon, and spoke of the unconscious mind and its multidimensionality, its connection to a collective unconscious mind, so came forth the awareness of mythology and the archetypes and energies that are universal, roles that are universal, energies that are universal, identification that is universal, roles, for example, mother, father, earth mother, etc., etc. And that can very much include the archetypes as taught in the Torah. But as Carl Jung really opened up this whole realm of unconscious mind, more unseen friends began to come to teach. And therefore, an evolution of channeling now starts to show itself, in which unseen beings come to teach, not just to prove, not just to prophesy, but to teach and to heal. Healing as a co-creation with individual people, of course, big subject. So we would suggest, bringing it into a nutshell, channeling past was with a predominance of prophecy and proof, and of the present and future, channeling is very much about teaching and healing, and one more thing, very important, helping humanity to evolve its view of itself. Helping humanity to see itself in a new way. To oversimplify it, to see ourselves as spirit. Spirit choosing to be in a body, to have a lifetime, to see ourselves as souls, incarnated in a body. Not a body that just happens to have a soul, but a soul that is choosing to have a body. So humanity is seeing itself in a different way. And as this is occurring, and as consciousness is evolving, the way people use their consciousness is evolving. Channeling allows this evolution to occur, because as more and more numbers of people feel the connection with spirit, with unconditional love, and with the divine, when they know it is real in their lives, not only do they get to see, indeed, how their own spirit and unconditional love is real, how wondrous they are in that way, not for the ego, but how deserving in the eyes of all that is, each individual is. They also evolve how they perceive their reality. And as new channels become integrated with the idea that they are truly channeling and touching the other dimensions and bringing it through, they begin to see their reality differently, begin to see that reality is indeed a co-creation with the magical realms and mystical realms and the love of all that is in its infinite forms. So the evolution of consciousness is a very, very big subject, but humanity's consciousness is evolving as it begins to see itself in a more multidimensional way. The unseen friends are bringing that right into tangible experience in that way. So we hope this answers the question.
Oh, yes. Thank you. One of the things that I think keeps people from exploring these beautiful areas that you have described and the possibilities is some of the energy that has been called the carnival aspect of metaphysics, where it was kind of an adolescent, ooh, isn't that spooky, isn't that neat? That energy, which has produced within the individuals often a skepticism or a cynicism. So I just got word that we have about 3 minutes, but perhaps you could talk about that a bit too.
Certainly. We would suggest that harkens back to the 1800s, when there was need for proof. And that approach of needing proof, I have to have proof before I even consider what's being said, is very, very limiting. And that will continue throughout history, because people will be looking at that paradox for a long time. We would suggest that needing proof that unseen friends are real is secondary to really listening to the information and finding out if that information is appropriate for you or not. And so it is a big subject, and we can certainly continue with that another time. But perhaps as an overview that will help, that it is within the individual. The need for discernment is there, but the need for proof before considering information is as if saying, well, I don't trust myself. I've got to prove that source is real before I even listen to what they say. You can listen to what anyone says and decide for yourself if the information is appropriate.
And that would apply in any area to discern the value of the information that you get from any source, and
Exactly.
how consistent it is, and or whether or not it contradicts itself, that sort of thing.
You can go to a university, and if you don't like the professor, you still may listen to what he says.
So that's a great suggestion, just in general, to discern the value of information
For
before we
yourself.
just take it in and accept it. Torah, I want to thank you so much for being a guest on my show. It's just a pleasure for me to have had you here. And I want to also thank the viewers for giving their attention today. And I'd like to say goodbye until the next time.